What steps did you take in order to complete this week's milestone? Some steps that I took to complete this week's milestone was researching the process of building a masonry basement unit and what precautions one must take to properly construct them. What was the most difficult part of creating this week's portion? The most difficult part was positioning the metal ties, which are located right here, properly, as well as designing the anchor bolt due to its irregular shape. How do you think this compares to creating it in the real world? Well, obviously, in the real world, you're there physically building this, while here in class, we're just designing a section view of it. And so I don't think the physical, it isn't as hard physically, but mentally, it's a little different, especially since when building a section view, you have to get every minute detail and make sure to specify every piece that is in this section view. I think this is similar to a design plan that workers would look at when building a masonry basement unit, do because they need to know what steps you have to take to build this and where these masonry veneers have to go and when to put the sheathing and how big the airspace has to be in between. So I'm assuming they would use something like this on site, but I think that's the only similarities between this and uh, building it physically on site. What aspects of this milestone do you foresee as being the most difficult portion to recreate in real life? Well, some aspects that I see being the most difficult is the concrete masonry, as well as excavating and providing uh, sufficient support for the dirt, or to prevent the dirt from collapsing onto the walls. So I guess like what I mean by that is when excavating, you have to make sure that the walls around you don't collapse and there's enough support. And I think that's why you put the masonry veneers first, and then you put the sheathing and the anchor, and you put the sheathing afterwards. Because if you don't put the masonry veneers before the sheathing, the walls of the dirt will collapse onto the sheathing, and then you can't. It's just a waste of time. So I think that would be the most difficult part, making sure that everything's up to code and that there's enough support when building the masonry basement unit.